Hey everybody again, my name is Tommy Cianciolo. I work for Trout Unlimited as our water quality project coordinator. I'm based out of our Klamath Falls office. And I briefly want to give a shout out to my co-author, Charlie, who's here today. We do a lot of these process-based restoration projects together, and it makes it a lot more fun and enjoyable when you have a trusted colleague and good friend working alongside you. And not to mention my other TU colleagues, Nell, Shannon, and Evan in our K Falls office as well. And I'm really excited to talk to you all about the growing momentum around process-based restoration that Trout Unlimited and our partners in the Upper Basin are implementing on the ground. So I'm going to talk about some stories of some implemented projects, some lessons that we've learned from those projects, some monitoring results as well for this audience, and some continued challenges. So I know, Randy, you were talking about one Klamath Basin, but for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to talk about the Upper Basin here. So we're talking about the Klamath upstream of Klamath Falls. So we have Upper Klamath Lake, Subbasin, Williamson, and the Sprague. And the Upper Klamath is an amazing place to live and to work. We have some absolutely amazing floodplain habitats. You can see here on the left, mouse here. That's the Sprague Basin, snow melt driven. We get some really big flows in the spring. If it wasn't confined by levees, that water would be going everywhere across the floodplain. We also have Upper Klamath Lake, which you can see here on the right, Oregon's largest natural lake by surface area. But as we've talked about a lot today, issues with phosphorus loading, algal blooms where Schwamm and cockatoo suckers live. And then we also have a lot of groundwater inputs to the basin as well, like you can see here on Crystal Creek, right at the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. So all this amazing kind of fertile soils, wetland habitats, floodplains were basically great places for European colonizers to set up ranches and agriculture. And we also lost the stewardship of the land from the Klamath tribe. So we have some major sources of degradation in this basin that have happened for more than a century now. And I'm going to touch on a few of these before jumping into kind of what process-based restoration is. Some big drivers of riverscape degradation are levees, channel modifications, removal of riparian, vegetation and beaver, and also channel incision. So just going to go through these kind of quickly. I mentioned those really big levees in the Sprague Basin. This is a pretty common story here. You can see these levee where the main stem Sprague has lost a lot of process space. So rather than that water slowing down, sinking into the floodplain, it is now being sent as like a fire hose, basically, right to Klamath Lake, delivering a lot of phosphorus-rich sediment. We also have a ton of different channel modifications and tributaries of the basin here. You can see this one pushed to one side of the floodplain to facilitate cattle grazing. You can also see we have lots of diversions. So the idea is to dry out these historically wet floodplain areas and then divert water and irrigate for pasture land. That same site also tells a really interesting story about the removal of riparian vegetation. I really wish I could go back and see what these amazing complex willow galleries would have looked like back in the day. Same site, willow galleries in the 1950s, not so much in today's landscape. I also want to take a moment just to look at this photo of a beaver complex. This always makes me really happy. Charlie and I actually took this drone photo a few days ago on the Upper North Fork Sprague River. The Hudson Bay Company, which is a fur trapping company based out of England, extirpated almost every single beaver in the Klamath Basin by the mid-1800s. We would have had a lot more landscapes that look like this, really complex, slowing water down. Today, a lot more single-threaded channels. And when you remove when you add levees and you straighten channels, when you remove the willow complexes and the beavers that slow down the water, you get really powerful streams, which is what we have nowadays in the Upper Basin. And we have some really amazing channel incision. These are pretty standard photos of some of the streams that we have to work with in the Upper Basin, cutting through those soft alluvial soils that is good for ranching and for cattle grazing. Kind of a short story. I know I wasted some time there talking about that, but really we have too many of these on the left, where we have historical floodplain areas that have been sized, riparian vegetation and beavers removed. These were once sinks of sediment. Now they're sources of sediment that's going right to Upper Klamath Lake, contributing to those algae blooms. And we don't have enough of these highly complex connected floodplain and channel systems dominated by riparian vegetation and beaver that are highly resilient to drought, to wildfire, and to climate change as well. Just as a quick aside, since I have time now, I'll tell you that this photo here on the right, this was burned by the 2021 bootleg fire. We have isolated populations of threatened bull trout in the Upper Basin. The only bull trout that survived in these highly burned areas were found in this beaver complex. So very resilient habitat. So understanding those sources of degradation, there's a growing movement around process-based restoration that Trout Unlimited and many other partners in the Upper Basin, including Fish and Wildlife Service, the Klamath Tribes, Klamath Watershed Partnership, are implementing on the landscape. And rather than treating symptoms of degradation, we're trying to restore the actual fundamental processes that maintain the health of a river, such as the floodplain connectivity, that riparian vegetation that drives structure, and then also beaver dams. Basically with the end goal of having self-sustaining and resilient riverscapes. Max, you mentioned the Great Dismal Swamp on Spencer Creek. That's a photo of what it looks like. That's why it's going to be such good coho habitat, as we have a highly connected system. So before I talk about some of those case studies that we've been working on, I want to just give a quick primer on exactly what low-tech process-based restoration is. And I figured a good way of doing that is by walking through the Riverscape principle slide that's in the low-tech PBR manual that was made by Utah State and their collaborators. But we're really focusing this process-based restoration in these low-gradient floodplain areas that riparian vegetation historically would have dominated kind of the morphology of a stream. And these principles, there's 10 of them, only 4 of them here on this slide, but the main things I want to focus on is that streams need space to move throughout the floodplain, so getting rid of those levees. And the systems that we're working in, vegetation is what drives basically structure in the formation of stream complexes, and that the inefficient conveyance of water is really healthy. You might have heard the phrase, let's see if I can remember it, the sink it, spread it, store it, right, on the landscapes. That's what we're trying to do with basically the addition of temporary woody debris elements, such as a beaver dam analog or a woody debris structure. So this table on the right shows the low-tech PBR projects that have been implemented by TU and our partners since 2018. I want to give a quick disclaimer that there's been much more process-based restoration that's been implemented by non-TU partners as well, such as the Klamath Tribes and the Fish and Wildlife Partners Program and Klamath Watershed Partnership as well. But we've really been accelerating this work since about 2021. And at this point, we've restored our ongoing stewardship of 14 miles of stream. And a lot of this low-tech work is not one and done. We're continuing to come back and adaptively manage and steward these projects, which you can see those 3 miles of restoration work there. And for our case studies that I'm going to go into a second, we're going to be talking about Sun Creek, which is a tributary to the Wood River, and then also 2 fire-affected streams, including Leonard and Brownsworth Creek, far up in the headwaters of the South Fork watershed. So this work doesn't really happen like randomly on the landscape. We have some amazing prioritization documents in science that guide where the work occurs and how it happens. So we have the Upper Klamath Basin Watershed Action Plan, the IFRMP, and some beaver restoration tool modeling that was completed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So a lot of kind of good background information that prioritizes the work. And then we spent a lot of time in Charlie's truck, driving around to different project sites, visiting with landowners, planning these projects, securing permits. All of that work goes in. And then we have some absolutely amazing funders that allow the work to happen, including Fish and Wildlife, Catena Foundation, OWEB, and the Forest Service. And then also, we have the highly trained hand crews who actually implement the work. The Klamath Tribes have an awesome restoration crew as well. We usually work with Swift Water Designs and Anabranch Solutions, and my favorite days on the job are working with these crews in the streams, implementing the restoration work. Their attitude for restoration and hard work is really contagious. So make sure I want to give them a big shout out. So with that background kind of completed, let's dive into some of these case studies here. So the first one is Leonard and Brownsworth Creek. This was a Trout Unlimited project in partnership with the Fish and Wildlife Partners Program. These two small dynamic headwater streams were both burned in the 2021 bootleg fire. Before the fire, there were isolated populations of threatened bull trout that lived here. So we know we wanted to go in post-fire and try to get some woody debris structures in the stream to help capture some of that sediment that we knew was going to be transported downstream. So this project had two different phases of work, 2022, 2023, where almost 200 structures were built across about 1.5 miles of stream. And we'll get to some monitoring results later in the talk, but we're doing turbidity monitoring, drone flights, and temperature monitoring at the site. This is a photo that ODF&W took right after the fire. This is pretty much what the whole watershed looked like, burned to a crisp, 100% burned area, most of it in the intense category. So this was a project with Swiftwater Designs. Unfortunately, we tried to get in right post-fire. We had to wait until that next spring, but as soon as we had snow melt, we had crews in there, basically taking these streams in these low gradient areas where it was some degradation had occurred due to some timber practices. And by the way, I should say that this is on private land on Green Diamond Timber Company. They've been an amazing partner to work with on these projects. And kind of two different structures were built. We had a BDA type structure, which you can see here, really just a big woody debris jam. The goal of this was to capture sediment and grade the channel, and then basically have floodplain water go out there under high flows. And then we had a lot of strategic woody debris dropped on the floodplain, like you can see here on the right, trying to capture some of that sediment. Here is an example of what one of those BDAs look like. Here you can kind of see the posts, maybe not so much with that screen. This giant slug of sediment that was deposited just 1 week after the structure was installed, grading that channel bed elevation, and then we have floodplain connectivity out onto here, basically establishing a stage 0 type condition. Here's a similar floodplain area, all that fresh sediment captured because of these kind of trees that were dropped in these strategic areas. Great substrate for willows and other riparian vegetation to grow on post-fire. So that was kind of Leonard Brownsworth Creek, and I mentioned some monitoring results we'll go into in a bit. But this one, transitioning a bit, this is Sun Creek. Sun Creek is a really amazing place. It used to be entirely diverted to support cattle ranching. In 2017, a in-stream flow transaction occurred, and then over 2 miles of channel were constructed to reconnect Sun Creek to the Wood River. Lots of different partners have been involved with Sun Creek over the years. The restoration that I'm going to be talking about with you all today is on a private ranch where the constructed channel went through in partnership with the Fish and Wildlife Service. Again, that constructed channel, it was successful in a lot of different places, but also was engineered generally too straight, not quite sinuous enough. And the channel has started to incise over time. So we wanted to add some more structure to reduce that incision, capture sediment, and also raise groundwater levels for riparian vegetation. So those projects had 2 different phases, 2022, 2023, less structures in the first one, about 70 structures or so, and then lots of monitoring on this project, which we'll get into, including turbidity, drone flights, groundwater wells, and some fish surveying as well. So this is what Sun Creek looked like pre-project. Some pretty significant incision, not a ton of structure really in stream, driving the channel morphology, and you can see kind of a cage graveyard here, as we kind of call them, where these riparian plants are planted, but the groundwater level is not high enough for them really to do well. So this is a project with Fish and Wildlife Service and with Anabranch Solutions. They went in and built some BDAs in the channel, also put a lot of wood here on these activated side channels under higher flow, and the addition of some post-assisted log structures. They're basically like woody debris jams that are meant to increase the sinuosity of a channel, create some deeper pools, and some in-stream habitat complexity for the bull trout. This is a working cattle ranch. Thankfully, we've just secured total exclusion from the riparian area, which is really exciting. This is a photo of a beaver dam analog pushing that high water out onto the floodplain. I'm really hoping that these willows are going to go crazy with those higher groundwater levels this year. Here's what a drone flight looked like from May of last year. Under these exact same flow conditions the year before, all of that water was staying in that channel, which we'll get to. With the with the drone monitoring results, but a lot more ecological work being done with that water out onto the floodplain, a lot of sediment being captured. So probably now to what you all are most interested in, the monitoring. And before I want to get into the results, I want to acknowledge a co-author with us as well on this type of work, Megan Skinner, Fish and Wildlife Service. We've been doing some kind of joint monitoring protocols, trying to assess the work that the ecological results that this work is having. So we're monitoring a lot of different parameters, turbidity, groundwater, and DVI with drones, a lot of good stuff. There's an ever-growing number of resources that we're turning to develop these monitoring plans, look at different protocols, and including the Sierra Meadows Wetland and Riparian Monitoring Plan, really like that one. Utah State has a monitoring protocol, and then TU and some partners are also developing kind of a guidelines document for LTPBR monitoring, kind of focus on the Upper Basin. Okay, so these are just going to share some kind of quick preliminary results of the monitoring that we've seen so far. This one's really exciting for me from a water quality perspective. So this is a time series plot showing daily turbidity at upstream in black and downstream in gray monitoring stations. Pre-project, they almost exactly mirrored each other. Immediately post-restoration, and especially under high flows, we see a dramatic and sustained decrease in turbidity that's lasted throughout the last 2 years post-project, which has been really exciting to see. We're seeing similar results on Leonard and Brownsworth creeks as well that were burned in the fire. Going along with that, I showed that photo of the floodplain monitoring, which you can see here on the right. Post-project at about 15 CFS, which is kind of like an average high flow in Sun Creek, we had 0.2 acres of flooded area down here in the lower end of the project reach. Under that same flow conditions, 15 CFS the next year, we had over 8 acres of floodplain connectivity, which is fantastic, not just from a sediment capture perspective and groundwater perspective, but also for the Oregon spotted frog, which lives in this vicinity. Unfortunately, the restoration crews flooded out my control site for my groundwater monitoring wells, but this is taken from a monitoring well about 10 meters away from the stream channel. And we saw about a 1.5 foot increase in groundwater immediately post restoration that's been sustained over time. And then that's also shown in our NDVI monitoring as well. We have a multispectral drone that we fly in the late fall, kind of August, September time period. Every year, those purple colors show an increase in NDVI above a background, above our control site upstream. The yellow is a decrease in NDVI. Overall, a lot more greenness on the landscape. Those riparian vegetation are reacting well to those higher groundwater. So overall, about 40% increase in NDVI above background conditions. Sticking with Sun Creek, this was originally a bull trout reconnection project. So in 2017, Sun Creek was reconnected to the Wood River. There's a population of bull trout in the upper reaches of Sun Creek on Crater Lake National Park. Those bull trout have slowly moved downstream into the reconnected reach and are now found in the Wood River and some of its other tributaries, which is really exciting. So this has been a huge monitoring effort with ODFW, with the Crater Lake National Park, Fish and Wildlife Service, Klamath tribes, us as well. It's one of my favorite days of the year, going out in the fall, sampling for bull trout in this restored reach. And while we can't say that the process-based restoration that we installed directly kind of contributed to that increase in bull trout, they were kind of already trending that direction through time. I think the biggest thing that we can say is it's not harming them, looks like it's helping, and also no fish passage issues with bull trout with these B days, which has been great to see. This is moving to Leonard Creek, that burned one that I was talking about earlier. This stream, you can see here, this blue line, it was pushed to one side of a floodplain here to facilitate timber harvest in this floodplain at one point in time. So we had incised channel, those woody debris structures push water out onto the floodplain, and now we effectively have a stage 0 like condition where we have a big increase in channel area and a ton of extra habitat as well for fish. So that's some of the monitoring results. I'm happy to talk in more detail offline about all the other monitoring that we're doing, data availability, all that kind of good stuff. So please give me a ring or an email and we can talk in more detail. I want to transition a little bit to the lessons that we've learned in planning this work and also some of the continued challenges that we face. And I want to start on a hopeful note, which is that this work is highly impactful. And it can be implemented at watershed scales. I think we've gotten a really good discussion about the ecological challenges that we face in the Upper Basin. We have Schwalm and Cop2 that live in Upper Klamath Lake that are currently on the path towards extinction due to bad water quality conditions. We have isolated populations of bull trout that are 1 or 2 megafires away from being extirpated from this basin. Not to mention the climate change map, Randy, that you were showing earlier, and of course, the ever increasing risk of drought and wildfire. And this is how we combat that to the best of our ability, is if we take these degraded habitats in the Upper Basin and we make them look a little bit more like this. This is a photo of the Upper North Fork Sprague taken a few days ago. And we can do that with the addition of these woody debris structures, in addition to lots of other process-based restoration, including stage 0. So it's the kind of work that gets me really excited to be in this basin, to be working for Trout Unlimited, and to have the amazing partners that we have. I feel very appreciative of that. Site visits are hugely important. Being with colleagues out on the ground, on a site, different flow conditions of the year, walking project sites, getting the shoes dirty, that's always hugely impactful for a successful project, and we've seen that with this type of work. Kind of an interesting thing that we've learned is that sediments actually can be our friend in this type of work. In the Klamath, we have phosphorus-rich sediments, but the nice thing about having a big sediment load is when we put in these woody debris structures and we have incised channels, those structures can trap that sediment and degrade that channel much more quickly if we had if we were sediment starved in these systems. And also, process-based restoration and those systems that we're working in is all about natural recruitment of vegetation to support beaver, to support woody debris jams, to get the ecological results that we need. So anything that we can do to get recruitment of vegetation quickly is worth pursuing. So it's riparian vegetation planting if we don't have a local seed source. It's solving our cattle question. Whatever we can do to get more wood in the stream will result in ecological results faster. And then some continued challenges. The number one thing that is slowing down the pace of scale of the work currently up in the Upper Basin is permitting. To put one piece of wood in a stream usually takes us a year of permitting and 6 different agencies. I know the California folks have it even harder. So, we have a lot of funding currently available with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, those other great funders I was mentioning. We currently have a lot of landowner buy-in for the work. I wish we had more, but we still have a lot. And the crews are primed and ready to go for implementing this type of work. So the number one thing right now is permitting. Since I have time, I'll tell you that the Brownsville to Leonard Creek, that was considered a post-fire emergency project. Those permits took us less than a month to get because the work was considered an emergency. I would argue that all this work that we're doing, connecting floodplains, is an emergency, given the ecological challenges that exist with what Mike was talking about, with people from all over the world coming to see the Klamath Dam removal and the hopeful and imminent return of salmon to the Upper Basin. This work could not be more important right here, right now in the moment. Process-based restoration really pushes on some old assumption of stream restoration that focuses on structure and channel stability. So working through those issues with different project partners has been, I think, really helpful for me, and also a challenge as well. But it forces some really hard discussions, and I think some really good ones as well, especially when critical infrastructure like bridges is involved. One thing that's come up kind of recently is kind of what impact does creating really complex habitat have on the brook trout versus other native fish species like red band and bull trout interactions there. So we're working with ODFW to try to design some fish monitoring questions to look at that question. And then of course cattle. I mean, if there was a cow in the room, it'd be the size of an elephant. There is a lot of these projects are They're working ranches. We have a lot of private land in the Upper Basin. So getting cows out of the riparian area, whether that's by fencing or off-stream watering options, those usually have to go along with our in-stream process-based restoration projects. So with that, I'll leave you to ponder if this was either a man-made or a natural beaver dam, and I'll take any questions. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I actually spent last summer as a restoration technician with Anabranch, so thanks for the
Awesome.
shout out.
Thanks for all your hard work. I was sitting in my office probably, so thank you.
I was hoping to have you comment more on the feasibility of scaling this to the watershed or basin scale. My experience was that it's slow going. It's manual labor with a bucket and a shovel. And like you mentioned, these structures require maintenance, like going back year after year to keep them up. So yeah, can we scale it to the basin, and how do we do that?
That's a really good question. I definitely think that we can do it, especially if we get local buy-in from all these different partners. We've been working mostly in these kind of smaller headwater streams. This is actually a pretty good example of the average stream that we're working with. The crews, as you know, can move a lot quicker in a smaller stream than like the main stem Sprague River, for example. So we have yet to implement a really big low-tech PBR project in a big river like that. But Charlie, my colleague, mentioned the big swing effort. As part of that, we're going to be having Res model what process-based restoration, probably with some stage 0 and other kind of techniques involved for a bigger river, kind of what that looks like. So I'm hoping that modeling effort will get us a really good idea of kind of the scale of what we're talking about. But the thing that I really like working about the hand crews is the restoration work, is supporting typically local people. And I think that's one reason I really admire the Klamath Tribes crew, is that it supports local professionals of restorationists. And I think if we can scale that up and have locally based crews, Swiftwater Designs, they're based out of California. A lot of those folks live in Sonoma area. Anabranch is typically like state-based. If we could have an Upper Klamath Basin hand crew that is, felling trees and have the funding to support that and the work to support it, I think we could definitely make it happen. But you're right, it would be a big increase in the amount of work that we're doing now, but I think it's needed.
Thanks for your presentation. It's really inspiring to see things like, the increase in the wetted area channel going up, like, was it 40 times or something like that in one reach? I mean, that's just incredible. So it's, some of this stuff is sort of a math problem, right? Like, if we're trying to increase our fish populations and we can only treat, whatever, 10% of the area at any time frame, if we can get those 40x increases in that 10%, that that makes a big difference. So just awesome. And the other would be, so as Jake mentioned in the mini updates, we're going to be working on assessment of temperature effects of the bootleg fire. And so maybe following up with you to ask about if you want to participate in that or share temperature data or whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. And for a different project, we have temperature loggers all throughout the Brownsworth watershed. So yeah, I've shared those data with ODFW, but I'm happy to follow up with you as well. One thing that's on the back burner is like trying to get a lot of the data that we're collecting, especially the water quality information, in addition to with you, Randy, and KBMP, but onto like DEQ's website, for example.
I noticed that what challenges interspecies, like invasive species interactions, VDAs often, do you see after you put them in, there's more invasive or more introduced species behind the BDAs? And do you have a way to combat that, or is it just removal?
So far, we have no idea. It's a concern that has been raised by ODFW and others. We know that brook trout love beaver dams. If you go up into the Upper Sprague and you go fishing, I can give you some secret spots up there too. So just come ask me. But bring a small fly rod and you'll catch 100 brook trout in one day. So especially on Sun Creek, where we have bull trout, and brook trout. If we are creating really complex habitat that basically brook trout they benefit more comparatively than bull trout, is that from a fish perspective, is that a bad thing? From a water quality perspective, I think it's a great thing, right? But of course, there's more to consider than just water quality in some cases. So just thinking about where we're working, and thankfully on Sun Creek, we do brook trout removals every year. So we can't look at that question specifically on Sun Creek for that reason. But we're trying to basically do some monitoring. This year or last year, we did some pre-project monitoring. This year will probably be pre-project as well, where we're not going to remove the brook trout. We're going to do the restoration work, and we're going to basically monitor the fish before and after and just see. There hasn't been any studies that I know of. If anybody knows of one, please send it to me. I would love to see it. Yeah. I'm sure we'll need your all's help sampling fish too. So we'll email you.
So it sounds like we have a couple questions online.
Are you seeing any increase in temperature with increasing the wetted areas?
So we've just started temperature monitoring last year. So I would say maybe at next year's KBMP talk, if I give one, we'll have some answers for you. We've done some very preliminary temperature monitoring on like 2 BDAs. Didn't see any increase in temperature, but frequently we're restoring over a mile of stream and we have 50 BDAs. So I'd say to be determined on that one. The thing that I love most about some monitoring that has been done, like in Bridge Creek in some kind of central Oregon, the John Day Basin, is they found that the beaver dams create a larger heterogeneity of temperature. So the top of the beaver dams warm, the edges warm, which is great for young fish, especially in the spring. But those higher groundwater levels increase the hyperetic exchange, and those deeper pools, which we also see with the process-based restoration, usually have cooler temperature pockets in there. So with our temperature monitoring, we're doing the kind of traditional like a hobo logger upstream and downstream, but we're also looking at heterogeneity of temperature within a project reach as well.
Cool.
So to be determined.
Nice. And kind of following up on that, maybe for some of the folks in the Scott River who have put in BDAs over the course of the years, I don't know if Sharna is still here, or Eli Scott or someone, can you comment on that temperature? Are you seeing similar to what he's describing, more heterogeneity and any?
I would defer to
Sharna, are you ready? Just about the tax temperature.
So we first started with first BDAs when 2014. That was one of the concerns, that we were warming water, causing adverse effects to the water quality. So we did spend quite a bit of time in that initial after implementation. We've pretty much let up on that because there is times in the year, particularly in midsummer, late summer, where we have a extraction. It's not necessarily the BDAs themselves, it's more of a flow dependent. So we're seeing water behind dams that aren't influenced by dams just because the flow. You just start seeing those temperature impairments and thermal barriers, if you will. But if we have flow in our system and we have water that's coming in from the top, we are not seeing adverse temperature generally.
And I don't know, field visits from any of the regulatory or permitting authorities to see the work you're doing and gotten feedback from them on, cheers or any good feedback to, tell us?
So plenty of visits from, Fish and Wildlife, Section 7 folks. Usually a DEQ and Army Corps, what? How many years behind on a project are they usually? Like 4 or 5? Yeah, I don't know. Not on one of my projects yet. We haven't had someone from Army Corps or DSL.
Okay.
Yeah, ODW.
All very supportive of the work. Very, we haven't had any folks from regulatory agencies, Army Corps, EQ, DSL, interested in using sites. We'd be happy to bring them out there, of course.
Mm.
Okay. I think our next presenter is online. Thank you.